Marcus Chen had seen broken things before: twisted metal, shattered circuits, engines that wheezed their last breath in his garage. 23 years of fixing what others couldn't had taught him that everything could be repaired with enough patience and the right tools. He never expected his greatest challenge would walk through his door on two legs, carrying something precious and dying in her arms. The Kithara were warriors, 7-foot-tall apex predators with silver fur and eyes like molten gold. They had conquered half the known galaxy before humanity even learned to make fire. Their ships carved through space like living weapons, their armies were legend, and their pride was absolute. So when Lyra Shadowmane, decorated commander of the Third Fleet, knelt in the oil-stained concrete of Chen's garage, with tears streaming down her alien face, the universe held its breath. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "Everyone else has given up. You're my last hope." In her arms lay a small figure, barely the size of a human child, with fur as white as starlight and breathing so shallow it was almost gone. Her offspring, her legacy, her heart walking outside her body. Marcus looked down at the dying alien child, then up at the most feared warrior race in the galaxy, and realized something that would change everything. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with weapons, but with hope. And sometimes a simple human mechanic becomes the bridge between two worlds, armed with nothing but stubborn determination and the unshakable belief that nothing, absolutely nothing, is beyond repair. This is the story of how humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our refusal to give up on the broken things everyone else calls hopeless. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of Chen's garage like an angry drumbeat, each drop adding to the symphony of mechanical sounds that filled the space. Marcus Chen wiped his hands on a greasy rag, squinting at the stubborn fuel injector that had been giving him trouble all morning. The smell of motor oil and welding fumes hung thick in the air, mixing with the ozone scent of the approaching storm. Outside, New Angeles sprawled in all directions, a maze of concrete and steel that housed 12 million souls. Most of them had no idea that their little blue world sat at the crossroads of 3 major trade routes, or that alien ships passed overhead daily, hidden behind cloaking fields and bureaucratic indifference. Marcus knew, though. He'd grown up watching the lights in the sky, dreaming of stars and distant worlds, while his father taught him the difference between a Phillips head screwdriver and a socket wrench. The garage had been his father's before him, and his grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Chens had fixed what was broken, built what was needed, and asked no questions about where their customers came from or where they were going. It was a good life, if a simple one. Marcus had never needed more than the satisfaction of a job well done and the steady rhythm of honest work. The front door's sensor chimed, cutting through his concentration. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall. Nearly midnight. Late for a customer, but not unheard of. Some of his best clients preferred the cover of darkness for their visits. "We're closed," he called out, not looking up from his work. "Come back tomorrow after 8. The response wasn't what he expected. Instead of footsteps retreating or a voice arguing about emergency repairs, he heard something that made his blood run cold, a soft, keening sound, like the wind through a broken window. It was the sound of something in pain, trying not to show it. Marcus set down his tools and walked toward the front of the garage, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. The sound came again, closer now, and with it came something else, the scent of rain and ozone, but underneath it something wild and alien that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The overhead lights flickered as he reached for the door control, and for a moment he hesitated. 23 years of late-night repairs had taught him caution. Not everyone who showed up after midnight was looking for legitimate help. But that sound, that heartbreaking, desperate sound, cut through his wariness like a laser through steel. He hit the door control. The massive bay door rolled up slowly, revealing the rain-soaked street beyond. Lightning split the sky, and in its brief, brilliant illumination, Marcus saw her. She stood in the doorway like something out of a fever dream, water streaming from silver fur that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. 7 feet tall, with the lean, predatory build of a natural hunter, she moved with a fluid grace that spoke of deadly efficiency. Her face was angular and sharp, with high cheekbones and a narrow muzzle filled with teeth that could tear through steel. Golden eyes, bright as molten metal, fixed on his with an intensity that should have sent him running. But it wasn't her size, or her obviously alien nature that stopped Marcus's breath in his throat. It was what she carried in her arms. The small figure was barely the size of a human child, wrapped in what looked like metallic fabric that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. White fur so pure it seemed to glow covered a face that was heartbreakingly young and peaceful in unconsciousness. The rise and fall of the tiny chest was so shallow that Marcus had to strain to see it. The adult alien, female, he realized, though he wasn't sure how he knew, looked down at the bundle in her arms, then back up at him. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder, deep and resonant, but edged with something that transcended species barriers. Fear! "Are you Marcus Chen?" she asked in accented but perfect English. Each word was carefully pronounced, as if she'd practiced them many times. "Yeah," Marcus managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "Yeah, that's me." She stepped forward, out of the rain and into the harsh fluorescent light of the garage. Up close, he could see details that made his engineer's mind race with questions. Her fur wasn't just silver, it was shot through with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. The clothing she wore looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured, conforming to her body like a second skin, while somehow managing to seem both practical and elegant. But it was her eyes that held him. Golden, yes, but with depths that spoke of intelligence, determination, and a grief so profound it made his chest ache in sympathy. "My name is Liara Shadowmane," she said, and even through his ignorance of alien politics, Marcus felt the weight of that name. It carried authority, respect, and something else, fear from her enemies and loyalty from her allies. "I am told you repair things others cannot." Marcus blinked, trying to process the situation. A 7-foot-tall alien warrior had just walked into his garage at midnight, carrying what was obviously her child, and asking for his help. It was the kind of scenario that belonged in bad science fiction movies, not in his quiet, predictable life. "I fix engines mostly," he said, the words sounding stupid even to his own ears. "Cars, trucks, the occasional hover bike. I'm not a doctor." Lyra's golden eyes never left his face as she carefully adjusted her grip on the small figure in her arms. "This is Kess," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the name. "She is my daughter. She is dying." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard desperation before. Customers whose livelihoods depended on getting their vehicles running. People who couldn't afford to be stranded. But this was different. This was the sound of a mother watching her child slip away, helpless to stop it. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it. "But I really think you need a hospital. Maybe the alien quarter downtown. They have specialists there. People who understand." "No!" The word cut through the air like a blade, sharp and final. Liara's lips pulled back slightly, revealing those deadly teeth. But Marcus realized it wasn't a threat. It was pain made manifest. "They have tried. All of them. The best healers on my homeworld, the medical centers on the core worlds, even the Synthesis Collective with their biomechanical expertise. They all say the same thing." She looked down at her daughter, and Marcus saw something in her expression that transcended species. The look of a parent who would move mountains, fight gods, or burn down the universe itself to save their child. "They say there is nothing they can do, that her condition is incompatible with treatment, that I should accept the inevitable and let her go peacefully." "But you won't," Marcus said softly. It wasn't a question. Liara's golden gaze snapped back to his face, and for a moment he saw past the alien features to something achingly familiar, a parent's fierce, irrational, absolutely unshakable love. "Never," she whispered. "I have fought battles across a dozen systems. I have faced down enemies that would make your nightmares weep with terror. I have never surrendered, never retreated, never accepted defeat." Her voice grew stronger with each word, filling the garage with quiet thunder. "I will not start with my daughter." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that went deeper than species or appearance. He'd seen that look before, in his own mirror, when the doctors had told him there was nothing more they could do for his father, when the cancer had won despite all their technology and knowledge and good intentions. He'd hated that word, inevitable, had raged against it, fought it, refused to accept it right up until the end. And even now, 3 years later, part of him was still fighting. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, stepping closer. Up close, he could see that the metallic fabric wasn't fabric at all. It was some kind of medical device, covered in displays and readouts that pulsed with soft light. Most of them were red. Liara hesitated, then seemed to come to some internal decision. Kess was born with what your doctors would call a genetic disorder. Her nervous system, it does not process bioelectrical signals correctly. The pathways that should carry messages between her brain and body are incorrect. Marcus nodded slowly, his engineer's mind already working on the problem. Like bad wiring in a circuit board. "Ha! An apt comparison," Lyra agreed, surprise flickering across her alien features. "The result is that her body cannot sustain itself. Her heart forgets to beat. Her lungs forget to breathe. Her organs forget their functions. The medical devices keep her alive, but they are failing. We have perhaps days before—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. "Teddy," Marcus could see it in the readouts, in the way some of the lights pulsed erratically while others had dimmed to almost nothing. "Why me?" he asked. "I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about alien physiology or genetic disorders. Hell, I barely passed high school biology." Liara was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes studying his face, as if looking for something. Finally, she spoke, her voice so soft he had to strain to hear it over the rain. 3 months ago, my ship was damaged in a battle with raiders near the Titan shipyards. The primary power coupling was destroyed, and our engineers said it would take weeks to fabricate a replacement. We could not wait. There were civilians trapped on a mining station, and the raiders were preparing to finish them off." Marcus listened, not sure where the story was going, but sensing its importance. "A human mechanic named Rodriguez came aboard," Liara continued. "He looked at our coupling for perhaps 10 minutes, then disappeared into your ship's supply rooms. When he returned, he had built a replacement from spare parts and scrap metal. It should not have worked. Our engineers said it was impossible, that human technology was too primitive, too crude." A small smile touched the corners of her mouth, transforming her fierce features into something almost gentle. "It worked better than the original." Rodriguez said his teacher had always told him that if you understood how something was supposed to work, you could usually figure out how to make it work, even with the wrong parts. He said humans had a talent for making impossible repairs. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain-soaked air. "Rodriguez was my student," he said quietly. "I taught him everything he knows." Liara nodded as if she'd expected that answer. "He told me that if I ever needed something truly impossible fixed, I should find Marcus Chen. He said you were the best mechanic in the sector and that you never gave up on anything, no matter how broken it seemed." She looked down at her daughter again, and when she looked back up, there were tears tracking silver lines down her alien face. "Everyone else sees a dying child with an incurable condition," she whispered. "But Rodriguez said you would see a problem that just needed the right solution. He said humans had a gift for finding hope where others found only despair." Marcus stared at the small figure in Liara's arms, his mind racing. A genetic disorder affecting nerve signal transmission. Bad wiring. He'd dealt with electrical problems before, complex circuits that seemed impossible to untangle. But this was a living being, not a machine. The complexity was staggering, the margin for error non-existent. It was impossible, but he'd made a career out of impossible repairs. "I need to see her medical records," he said finally. "Everything. Scans, test results, treatment attempts, the works. And I'll need to examine those life support systems." Hope flared in Liara's golden eyes like a newborn star. "You will help?" Marcus looked at the alien warrior kneeling in his garage, holding her dying child and placing her faith in a simple human mechanic. He thought about Rodriguez, somewhere out there among the stars, carrying the lessons Marcus had taught him. He thought about his father and the word inevitable, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that seemed to be hardwired into human DNA. "I'll try," he said. "I can't promise anything. This is way outside my expertise, and I don't even know if it's possible. But I'll try." Lyra closed her eyes, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure cracked. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Marcus realized he was seeing something extraordinary. One of the galaxy's most feared warriors allowing herself to be vulnerable, to hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the garage, something new was beginning. A partnership between species, a bridge built of desperation and hope, and the simple human belief that nothing was ever truly unfixable. Marcus Chen had spent his life repairing broken things. Now, with the weight of impossible expectations on his shoulders and the life of an alien child in his hands, he was about to attempt his most challenging repair yet. He just hoped he was good enough to deserve the faith being placed in him. The next morning brought clarity that the previous night's storm had washed from the air, along with a mountain of data that made Marcus's head spin. Liara had returned at dawn with what looked like enough medical records to fill a small library, all translated into English by systems Marcus didn't pretend to understand. She'd also brought something else, a portable medical scanner that looked more like a work of art than a diagnostic tool. Marcus had cleared out his main workbench, pushing aside half-finished projects and scattered tools to make room for the alien technology. Kess lay in the center of it all, surrounded by the soft hum of life support systems that seemed to breathe with her. The medical wrap that covered her small form pulsed gently, and Marcus could see the readouts more clearly now. Heart rate, neural activity, cellular oxygen levels, dozens of measurements that painted a picture of a biological system fighting a losing battle against itself. "Her people call it neural cascade syndrome," Liara explained, standing beside the workbench like a silver-furred sentinel. She'd been there all night, watching over her daughter with the intensity of a hunting predator. "It affects perhaps 1 in 10 million births among my kind. The neural pathways form incorrectly during development, creating feedback loops and signal degradation." Marcus nodded, studying the brain scans that floated in three-dimensional holographic displays around the workbench. The images were beautiful in an alien way, cascading patterns of light that showed the flow of bioelectrical signals through Kess's nervous system. But even to his untrained eye, he could see the problems. Dead zones where signals simply stopped. Chaotic areas where electrical impulses bounced around like pinballs. Pathways that led nowhere. "It's like a circuit board where half the traces are broken and the other half are shorting out," he muttered, tracing one of the problematic neural clusters with his finger. The hologram responded to his touch, zooming in to show even finer detail. "That is surprisingly accurate," Liara said, and Marcus caught a note of something like respect in her voice. "Our best neurological specialists described it in much the same terms, though with considerably more complex terminology. He'd always believed that if you could understand a problem in simple terms, you were halfway to solving it. The trick was figuring out which simple terms applied. The life support systems, he said, gesturing to the devices that surrounded Kes like electronic guardians. They're basically doing what her nervous system should be doing automatically, monitoring vital signs, sending the right signals to keep everything running. Yes, Liara confirmed. They were designed by the finest biomechanical engineers in the sector. Each one cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Marcus walked around the workbench, examining the life support systems from every angle. They were elegant pieces of engineering, no doubt about it. Sleek, efficient, powerful enough to keep a complex biological system running indefinitely. But as he watched their operation, he began to see the fundamental flaw in the approach. They're treating the symptoms, not the cause, he said finally. Like putting a Band-Aid on a severed artery. It might work for a while, but it's not fixing the underlying problem. Liara's golden eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. The underlying problem is considered unfixable. The neural pathways are formed during early development. Once they're wrong, they cannot be corrected. Says, who? The question hung in the air between them, simple and direct. Lyra opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, looking momentarily uncertain. The medical establishment, she said finally. Decade of research. The fundamental laws of biological development. Marcus snorted, a sound that conveyed his opinion of medical establishments and fundamental laws. The laws of physics say bumblebees can't fly, but nobody told the bumblebees. He tapped one of the holographic brain scans, watching the neural pathways light up in response. Your doctors are thinking like doctors. They see a biological problem and try to fix it with biology. But what if we think about it differently? What do you mean? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his mind working through possibilities. He'd spent the early hours of the morning reading through Kess's medical files, cross-referencing alien physiology with human neurology textbooks he'd found online. The basic principles seemed to be the same across species, electricity flowing through biological circuits carrying information that kept everything running. The human brain has something called neuroplasticity, he said slowly. If one part gets damaged, other parts can sometimes learn to take over its functions. The pathways can reroute themselves, find new connections. He looked up at Liara. Do your people have something similar? Liara nodded cautiously. Neural adaptation, yes. But in cases like Kess's, the damage is too extensive. There aren't enough healthy pathways left to compensate. Not naturally, Marcus agreed. But what if we gave them some help? He moved to his computer terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard as he pulled up engineering schematics and bioelectrical data. The screen filled with diagrams that showed neural pathways overlaid with something that looked suspiciously like circuit designs. Neural implants, Lyra said, understanding dawning in her voice. They have been attempted. The rejection rate is nearly 100%. The body's immune system attacks them as foreign objects. Marcus shook his head. Not implants. At least not the way you're thinking. He gestured to the holographic brain scans. Look at this area here. This cluster of neurons that should be controlling respiratory function but isn't connecting properly to the brainstem. Yes, the pulmonary control nexus. The pathways are fragmented, non-functional. So instead of trying to replace them or bypass them completely, what if we just gave them a little boost? Something to amplify the weak signals, filter out the noise, help the existing pathways do what they're trying to do. Marcus pulled up another set of diagrams, these showing microscopic devices that looked more like tiny pieces of jewelry than medical equipment. They don't replace the biological systems. They integrate with them, work alongside them. Such technology does not exist, Liara said. But Marcus could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Not in any medical database, no, Marcus agreed. But the individual components do. Quantum processing chips small enough to fit inside a single cell. Biocompatible materials that can interface directly with nerve tissue. power sources that run on body heat and electrical activity. He turned to face her fully, and Liara saw something in his eyes that made her chest tight with hope and terror in equal measure. "I can't cure your daughter," Marcus said quietly, "but I might be able to give her the tools to cure herself." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sounds of the life support systems and the distant hum of traffic from the street outside. Liara stared at the holographic displays, at the complex web of data that represented her daughter's failing nervous system, and Marcus could practically see her mind working through the implications. "The risk," she began, "would be enormous," Marcus finished. "I'm talking about experimental technology, untested procedures, and a dozen different ways it could all go wrong. The neural enhancers might not integrate properly. They could cause immune reactions. They might interfere with existing brain functions." He paused, then added with brutal honesty, "She could die during the procedure." Liara closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "She is dying now. The life support systems are failing. The power cells are degrading, and her body is developing resistance to their interventions. The doctors give her perhaps 72 hours. Marcus felt the weight of that timeline settle on his shoulders, like a physical burden. 72 hours to design, build, and implement a solution that pushed the boundaries of known science. It should have been impossible, but he'd built a career on impossible repairs. "I'll need help," he said. "This is way beyond what I can do alone. I'll need specialists, equipment, maybe some favors from people who owe me. Whatever you need," Liara said immediately. "Money, resources, connections, I can provide them all." Marcus nodded, already making mental lists of what they'd need and who might be able to provide it. "There's something else," he said. "If we do this, if we actually try this crazy idea, you need to understand that I'm not a doctor. With Trust Teddy, I'm not bound by medical ethics or legal liability or any of the things that usually govern this kind of work." "What are you saying?" Marcus looked down at Kess, so small and still on the workbench, her white fur rising and falling with each artificially assisted breath. "I'm saying that if this goes wrong, it goes wrong spectacularly. And I'm saying that if it goes right," he trailed off, not wanting to voice hopes that might prove false. "If it goes right?" Liara prompted. "If it goes right, your daughter doesn't just survive. She becomes something new. Something that's never existed before, a hybrid of biological evolution and technological enhancement. She'll still be Cathara, still be your child, but she'll also be something more." Liara was quiet for a long time, her golden eyes moving between Marcus and her daughter. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I was young, I had a teacher who told me that the greatest victories often require the greatest leaps of faith. That sometimes the only way forward is to trust in something you cannot see or prove." She looked up at Marcus. "I have spent the last 3 months watching my daughter die while the finest minds in the galaxy told me to accept the inevitable. Now a human mechanic tells me he might be able to save her with experimental technology that exists only in theory." She smiled then, an expression that transformed her alien features into something beautiful and fierce and absolutely determined. "Where do we begin?" Marcus grinned back, feeling the familiar thrill of a challenging project taking shape in his mind. "We begin with coffee," he said. "Lots and lots of coffee. Then we start building miracles." As if summoned by their conversation, the garage door chimed with an incoming message. Marcus glanced at the terminal and saw a priority communication from Rodriguez, now serving aboard a deep space patrol vessel somewhere in the Outer Rim. "Marcus, got your message about needing specialist help? You're not going to believe this, but I've got contacts in the biomechanical engineering field. Dr. Sarah Kim, she's human but works with alien tech, stationed at the research facility on Kepler Station. Brilliant, a little crazy, and she owes me a favor from that coupling incident. Sending her contact info now. Also, there's a Zephyrian tech priest named Vex who specializes in impossible integrations. Weird guy, but he can make any two technologies work together. You didn't hear this from me, but he's currently hiding out on Earth after some unpleasantness with the Collective Council. Try the underground markets in Sector 7. Tell him Rodriguez sent you and that you need help with a project that will make the medical establishment weep. He'll love that. Good luck, teacher. Make the impossible look easy. Marcus read the message aloud and watched Liara's expression shift from desperate hope to something approaching confidence. Your student network is impressive, she observed. Rodriguez always was a good kid, Marcus replied, already composing return messages to the contacts Rodriguez had provided. Looks like we're about to find out just how good. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the garage windows, Marcus Chen and Liara Shadowmane began the process of assembling what would later be called the most unlikely medical team in galactic history. A human mechanic, an alien warrior, a renegade bioengineer, and an exiled tech priest, united by a single goal: to save the life of a dying child with technology that shouldn't exist and procedures that defied conventional wisdom. It was, by any reasonable standard, but as Marcus had learned long ago, the most rewarding repairs were always the ones that reasonable people said couldn't be done. Dr. Sarah Kim arrived at Chen's garage 16 hours later, stepping out of a hover taxi with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she was accustomed to being the smartest person in any room she entered. She was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe 35, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her clothes were practical: cargo pants with too many pockets, a jacket that looked like it had seen action on half a dozen different worlds, and boots that were definitely not standard medical issue. Marcus Chen, she said, extending a hand as she approached the workbench where Kess still lay surrounded by her failing life support systems. Rodriguez told me you were working on something impossible. He wasn't kidding. Marcus shook her hand, noting the calluses that marked her as someone who worked with her hands as much as her brain. Dr. Kim, thanks for coming on such short notice. Sarah, please. And don't thank me yet. I haven't seen what you're actually proposing. She set down a heavy case that looked like it could survive a direct missile hit. Rodriguez mentioned neural enhancement technology, but he was light on details. Liara stepped forward from where she'd been maintaining her vigil beside her daughter. The size difference between the alien warrior and the human doctor was striking, but Sarah didn't even blink at meeting a 7-foot-tall predator with golden eyes and razor-sharp teeth. Commander Shadowmane, Sarah said with a slight nod. I've heard of your campaigns against the Void Raiders. Impressive work. You know of my military service? Liara asked, surprise flickering across her features. Sarah smiled, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been mischief in her expression. Biomechanical engineering takes you to some interesting places. I've worked on everything from combat enhancement systems to deep space life support modifications. When you specialize in making living things work better with technology, you tend to hear about people who need that kind of help. Marcus led them both to the holographic displays that showed Kess's neural pathways in three-dimensional detail. Sarah's expression grew more serious as she studied the data, her trained eye picking out details that Marcus had missed. Neural cascade syndrome, she murmured, manipulating the display to zoom in on specific problem areas. I've seen a few cases, though never one this severe. The pathway degradation is extensive. She looked up at Marcus. Rodriguez said you had a theoretical solution involving neural enhancers. Marcus pulled up his preliminary designs, and Sarah's eyebrows rose as she studied them. These are ambitious, she said finally. Quantum processing elements integrated directly with neural tissue. The precision required would be extraordinary. But possible? Liara asked, leaning in with the intensity of a parent clinging to hope. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers dancing over the holographic controls as she examined the designs from every angle. Theoretically, yes, she said finally. The individual components exist, and the biological principles are sound. But the implementation, she shook her head. We're talking about microsurgery at the cellular level, real-time neural mapping during the procedure, and integration protocols that would have to be written from scratch. So it's impossible, Lyra said, her voice flat with disappointment. I didn't say impossible, Sarah replied with a slight smile. I said ambitious. There's a difference. She turned to Marcus. Rodriguez mentioned you were assembling a team. Please tell me you have someone who specializes in impossible integrations, because that's what this is going to require. As if summoned by her words, the garage's back entrance opened with a soft hiss of pneumatic seals. The figure that stepped through was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Even in his years of dealing with alien customers, Vex, if that was indeed his name, stood about 6 feet tall, with a build that suggested both organic and mechanical components in roughly equal measure. His skin had a metallic sheen that shifted between silver and deep blue, depending on the angle of the light, and his eyes were definitely artificial. Complex optical sensors that could probably see across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Most striking were his hands, which appeared to be entirely mechanical constructs of impossible delicacy and precision. Rodriguez sends his regards, Vex said in a voice that had a harmonic quality, as if multiple tones were speaking in perfect synchronization. He mentioned you needed assistance with a project that would upset medical traditionalists. I find such projects stimulating. Marcus noticed that Liara had automatically shifted into a defensive stance, her warrior instincts responding to the presence of someone whose nature she couldn't quite categorize. Sarah, on the other hand, was studying Vex with obvious fascination. Zephyrian Tech Integration Specialist, she said. I've heard about your people, but I've never met one. The stories about your capability to interface with any technology are supposedly greatly exaggerated. Vex's optical sensors focused on her with what might have been amusement. They are not exaggerated enough, he replied. Show me what requires integration, and I will determine if it falls within my capabilities. Marcus gestured toward the holographic displays, and Vex approached the workbench with fluid, precise movements. His mechanical hands passed over the life support systems without touching them, and Marcus realized he was somehow interfacing with their diagnostic systems directly. Fascinating, Vex murmured, his optical sensors shifting color as he processed data. The biological systems are attempting to function despite catastrophic neural pathway failures. The artificial supports are maintaining basic functions but cannot address the underlying cascade degradation. He looked up at Marcus. You propose to create hybrid enhancement nodes that integrate with existing neural tissue. That's the theory, Marcus confirmed. Sarah thinks the individual components are feasible, but the integration protocols are well within my capabilities, Vex finished, though the precision requirements will necessitate specialized fabrication equipment. He paused, his sensors focusing on something only he could see. The child's condition is deteriorating more rapidly than your timeline suggests. I estimate 18 hours before complete system failure. 18 hours, not the 72 they'd been counting on. That's not enough time, Sarah said, voicing what they were all thinking. Even if we had all the components ready, the fabrication alone would take 6 hours, assuming optimal conditions and no complications, Vex interrupted. I have access to nanofabrication systems that can construct the enhancement nodes to the required specifications. The surgical implementation will require another 4 hours, possibly 6 if complications arise. Marcus felt the familiar pressure of an impossible deadline, but also the thrill that came with pushing the boundaries of what could be accomplished. That leaves us about 8 hours of buffer time, he said, assuming everything goes perfectly, which it won't, Sarah added grimly. It never does. Liara looked between the three of them, her golden eyes bright with desperate hope. What do you need? What followed was the most intensive planning session of Marcus's career. They transformed the garage into something between a medical facility and an engineering laboratory, pushing aside automotive equipment to make room for fabrication units, surgical systems, and monitoring equipment that Vex seemed to produce from nowhere. Sarah took point on the biological aspects, mapping Kess's neural pathways in detail and identifying the optimal placement points for the enhancement nodes. Her expertise in biomechanical integration proved invaluable as she designed protocols that would allow the artificial components to interface seamlessly with organic neural tissue. Vex handled the technological challenges, his unique nature allowing him to bridge the gap between disparate systems in ways that seemed almost magical. He interfaced directly with Sarah's medical scanners, Marcus's engineering systems, and even Kess's life support equipment, creating a unified network that could monitor and respond to conditions in real time. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of being the coordinator rather than the primary technical specialist. His years of experience with impossible repairs proved crucial in identifying potential failure points and developing contingency plans. More importantly, his stubborn refusal to accept defeat kept the team focused when the scope of what they were attempting threatened to overwhelm them. Neural Pathway 17 is showing increased instability, Sarah reported, her voice tight with concentration. We're losing coherent signals in the motor control nexus. Compensating with enhanced life support protocols, Vex responded, his mechanical hands dancing over control interfaces that reconfigured themselves to match his needs. Stability restored, but the degradation rate is accelerating. Marcus checked the fabrication progress on his terminal. The enhancement nodes were taking shape in Vex's nanofabrication chamber, molecule by molecule, each one no larger than a few cells but containing processing power that exceeded most planetary computer systems. First batch is ready, he reported. Neural enhancement nodes for the primary motor control pathways. Sarah took the tiny devices, they looked like specks of glittering dust, and loaded them into a surgical delivery system that would place them with microscopic precision. Integration protocols are online. Vex, I'm going to need real-time feedback on neural compatibility as we introduce each node. Understood. I am monitoring all biological and technological systems simultaneously. The first test insertion was into a non-critical neural pathway, one that controlled minor muscle groups in Kess's left hand. Marcus watched the holographic displays as the enhancement node made contact with the existing neural tissue, interfacing with the biological systems and beginning its integration process. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the chaotic electrical patterns in that section of Kess's nervous system began to stabilize. The random firings smoothed into coherent signals, and the pathway that had been dark and non-functional began to glow with healthy activity. "It's working!" Sarah breathed, wonder evident in her voice. The node is not just enhancing the existing signals, it's helping the neural tissue remember how to function properly. Lyra leaned over the workbench, her golden eyes fixed on her daughter's still form. "Is she?" She moved her finger, Marcus said, pointing to where Kess's left hand had twitched slightly. Just a tiny movement, but it was voluntary neural activity. The pathway is functioning. The success of the first node gave them hope, but it also underscored the enormous scope of what they were attempting. Kess's nervous system contained thousands of pathways, dozens of critical control centers, and multiple layers of redundancy that had all been compromised by her condition. Working with frantic precision, they continued the process. Enhancement nodes for respiratory control, cardiovascular regulation, sensory processing, and cognitive function. Each insertion required careful calibration, real-time monitoring, and constant adjustments as the biological and technological systems learned to work together. Hours passed in a blur of technical jargon, careful procedures, and mounting exhaustion. Sarah's hands remained steady despite the pressure, guided by years of training and an absolute refusal to accept failure. Vex's inhuman endurance allowed him to maintain perfect concentration, his mechanical nature an advantage when dealing with procedures that required absolute precision. Marcus found himself thinking about his father again, about the word inevitable and the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. Somewhere in the middle of the night, as they worked to save an alien child with technology that shouldn't exist, he realized that this was what humanity brought to the galaxy. Not superior weapons or advanced technology, but the simple irrational belief that there was always another way. "Final node cluster going in now," Sarah announced, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "This is the big one. The primary cognitive processing center." Marcus held his breath as the last enhancement nodes made contact with the most complex and delicate part of Kessa's nervous system. This was the cluster that would determine not just whether she lived, but whether she remained herself in the process. The holographic displays lit up like a cascade of stars as thousands of neural pathways came online simultaneously. Connections that had been broken for months suddenly blazed with activity, and the chaotic patterns that had marked Kessa's condition transformed into the complex organized flows of a healthy nervous system. But more than that, the enhanced pathways were operating at levels far beyond normal Kithara neural activity. The quantum processing elements in the enhancement nodes were amplifying and accelerating every signal, creating new connections and possibilities that had never existed before. "Her brain activity is off the charts," Sarah reported, staring at readouts that showed cognitive function at nearly superhuman levels. "The enhancement nodes aren't just fixing the damaged pathways, they're optimizing everything. Her eyes, golden like her mother's but brighter, more intense, fluttered open and focused with startling clarity on the faces surrounding her. 'Mother,' she said, her voice soft but perfectly clear, 'I had the strangest dreams.'" The sound of Kessa's voice speaking clearly for the first time in months brought Lyra to her knees beside the workbench. Tears streamed down her silver-furred face as she reached out with trembling hands to touch her daughter's cheek. "Kess," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "My little star, you're awake." The young Kithara turned her head toward her mother's voice, and Marcus caught his breath at what he saw in her golden eyes. There was awareness there, yes, but also something more, a depth of understanding that seemed far beyond her apparent age. The enhancement nodes weren't just restoring her nervous system, they were amplifying every aspect of her neural activity. "I remember being sick," Kess said, her small voice carrying a note of wonder. "Everything was foggy, like trying to see through smoke. But now," she lifted one hand in front of her face, watching her fingers move with perfect coordination. "Now everything is so clear. I can feel every heartbeat, every breath. I can sense the electrical patterns in the walls, the quantum fluctuations in the fabrication equipment." Sarah leaned forward, her medical scanner already working to assess Kessa's condition. "That's the enhancement nodes integrating with your neural pathways," she explained gently. "They're not just fixing what was broken, they're giving you new capabilities." Kess sat up slowly, her movements careful but controlled. The life support systems that had been keeping her alive for months now registered normal function across all parameters. Her nervous system was not just working, it was working at levels that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible for her species. "I can hear your thoughts," Kess said suddenly, looking directly at Marcus. "Not the words, but the patterns, the way your mind works through problems. It's like watching someone solve puzzles made of light." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garage's temperature. Telepathy wasn't part of the design specifications. Vex's optical sensors focused on Kess with increased intensity. "The quantum processing elements in the enhancement nodes are operating at frequencies that interface with bioelectric field generation," he observed. Limited psychic sensitivity was a possible but unintended side effect. "Is that dangerous?" Liara asked, her relief at her daughter's recovery now tinged with concern. "Unknown," Sarah admitted, running additional scans. "Her brain activity is stable. All vital signs are normal, but she's operating at neural efficiency levels that are literally off our charts. We're in uncharted territory here." Kess swung her legs over the edge of the workbench, testing her balance and coordination. Every movement was precise, controlled. as if she was rediscovering what it meant to inhabit her own body. "I'm not just better," she said, her voice filled with quiet amazement. "I'm more. I can process information faster, see patterns that were invisible before, understand connections between things that seemed unrelated." She looked up at Marcus with eyes that held gratitude and something approaching awe. "You didn't just save my life. You changed what it means to be me." Before Marcus could respond, the garage's main door chimed with an incoming priority alert. The security display showed 3 vehicles approaching at high speed, sleek, official-looking craft that screamed government authority. "Cathara Medical Authority," Liara said, her expression hardening as she recognized the insignia. "They've tracked us here." "That's not possible," Sarah protested. "We've been operating under complete communications blackout. How could they demand the enhancement nodes?" Vex interrupted, his sensors shifting to deeper spectrums as he scanned the approaching vehicles. "The quantum processing elements emit a unique energy signature. If they were monitoring for unusual neural activity patterns," Marcus felt his blood run cold. "They've been watching for signs that Kess was still alive." The vehicles touched down outside the garage with military precision, and Marcus could see armored figures disembarking through the reinforced windows. These weren't medical personnel coming to help, they were enforcement officers coming to put an end to an unauthorized procedure that challenged everything the medical establishment believed about what was possible. "How long do we have?" Lyra asked, her warrior instincts taking over as she assessed the tactical situation. "Perhaps 90 seconds before they breach the entrance barriers," Vex calculated. "Their equipment appears to be military grade." Marcus's mind raced through options. The garage had security systems, but nothing that could stand up to a determined assault by government forces. They could try to run, but Kess was barely recovered from major surgery, and there was nowhere to go that the authorities couldn't follow. "There is another option," Kess said quietly, and something in her voice made them all turn to look at her. Her golden eyes were bright with an inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her enhanced neural activity. "I can interface with their systems. The enhancement nodes don't just work with biological tissue. They can connect to any compatible technology." "Kess." "No," Liara said immediately. "The risk is mine to take," her daughter replied with a maturity that was startling in someone so young. "These people want to shut down what Marcus created, to suppress technology that could help millions of others like me. I won't let that happen." The sound of cutting tools echoed from the garage's main entrance as the enforcement team began their breach. Marcus looked at Kess, seeing not just the alien child he'd helped save, but something new, a hybrid of biological evolution and technological enhancement that represented possibilities he was only beginning to understand. "What do you need?" he asked. Kess smiled, an expression that held both innocence and power in equal measure. "Just a direct connection to their command systems." "Vex, can you establish a link?" The Zephyrian tech priest was already moving, his mechanical hands interfacing with the garage's communication arrays. "Connection established," he reported. "Their systems are heavily encrypted, but the quantum processing elements should be able to—" Kess placed her small hand on Vex's mechanical arm, and suddenly the air around them shimmered with visible energy patterns. The enhancement nodes in her nervous system were interfacing not just with Vex's technology, but through it to the approaching vehicle's computer systems. "Fascinating," she murmured, her voice taking on an odd harmonic quality. "Their tactical systems are impressive, but they're designed to deal with conventional threats. They have no protocols for dealing with hybrid biotechnological interfaces." On the garage's security displays, Marcus watched as the approaching vehicles suddenly powered down, weapon systems went offline, communications arrays fell silent, and even the cutting tools at the main entrance stopped working. "What did you do?" Sarah asked, staring at the readouts that showed Kess's neural activity spiking to levels that should have been impossible. "I convinced their systems that they were experiencing a critical malfunction," Kess replied calmly. "All equipment has been placed in safe mode pending complete diagnostic review. The process should take approximately 6 hours. Liara stared at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Kes, what you just did, that level of technological interface should be beyond even enhanced neural capabilities. Should be? Yes. Kes agreed. But the enhancement nodes aren't just amplifying existing pathways, they're creating new ones. I can perceive and interact with technological systems in ways that weren't possible before the procedure. Marcus felt a chill of realization. They hadn't just saved Kes's life, they'd accidentally created something unprecedented. A being capable of bridging the gap between biological intelligence and technological systems in ways that neither had achieved alone. The medical authority won't give up, Sarah pointed out. Once they realize what's happened, they'll come back with more people, better equipment, and authorization to use whatever force is necessary. Then we need to be gone before that happens, Marcus said. But where can we go? They'll track us anywhere on Earth. And off-world options are limited. Not necessarily, Vex interjected, his optical sensors focusing on something beyond their immediate situation. There are communities throughout the galaxy that exist outside official oversight. Independent research stations, frontier settlements, places where questions about the legality of enhancement procedures are less pressing. Lyra nodded slowly. The free colonies. They have treaties that prevent the major powers from operating within their territory. If we could reach one of them, my ship is still in orbit, she continued. If we can get past the atmospheric monitoring stations, we should be able to reach free space. Kes looked up from where she was still interfacing with the garage's systems, her enhanced awareness processing multiple data streams simultaneously. The monitoring stations use the same basic technological framework as the enforcement vehicles, she said. I should be able to create similar system failures if we time our departure correctly. Marcus looked around the garage. His life's work, his father's legacy, everything he'd built over 23 years of honest labor. Walking away from it felt like tearing out a piece of his soul. You don't have to come, Liara said, reading his expression with startling accuracy. You've done more than enough. You saved my daughter's life and gave her possibilities I never dreamed of. No one could ask for more. No, Marcus said quietly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Rodriguez was right when he told you that humans don't give up on broken things. And this, he gestured to encompass not just the garage, but the larger situation they found themselves in. This isn't finished yet. He looked at Kes, at the wonder in her golden eyes and the potential she represented, and made a decision that would change the course of his life. If the medical establishment wants to suppress technology that could help millions of people, then they're going to have to work for it, he said. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't accidentally interface with a battleship's main computer and start an interstellar incident. Kes laughed, a sound like silver bells that somehow managed to carry harmonics from the enhancement node's quantum processing. I make no promises, she said solemnly, but I'll try to be careful. As they began gathering essential equipment and preparing for departure, Marcus felt the familiar thrill of embarking on an impossible repair. This time, though, the thing that needed fixing wasn't a machine or a circuit board. It was an entire system of thinking that said some problems were beyond solution. Outside, the disabled enforcement vehicles sat silent in the gathering dawn light, their crews struggling with equipment failures they couldn't explain or repair. Inside the garage, an unlikely team of specialists worked with quiet efficiency to prepare for a journey that would take them beyond the reach of those who believed that some things were better left broken. Marcus Chen had spent his life proving that nothing was irreparable if you had the right tools and enough determination. Now, with an enhanced alien child showing him possibilities he'd never imagined, and a team of specialists who specialized in the impossible, he was about to find out if that philosophy could work on a galactic scale. The greatest repair of his career was just beginning. 6 months later, the research station orbiting Kepler 442b hummed with activity that would have been unimaginable when Marcus Chen was fixing hover cars in his father's garage. The converted asteroid facility housed laboratories, workshops, living quarters, and most importantly, a medical center that pushed the boundaries of what was possible when you combined human ingenuity with alien technology and the enhanced capabilities of a hybrid biotechnological consciousness. Marcus stood in the main laboratory, watching through reinforced viewports as ships arrived from across the galaxy. Each one carried passengers who had been told their conditions were incurable, their problems unsolvable, their situations hopeless. They came from dozens of different species, with ailments that ranged from genetic disorders to traumatic injuries to degenerative diseases that had baffled the finest medical minds in their respective civilizations. They came because word had spread to the underground networks that connected the galaxy's desperate and forgotten. Word of a place where a human mechanic, an alien warrior, a renegade doctor, and a tech priest worked alongside a enhanced child to perform miracles that shouldn't be possible. The Hegemony Council has issued another formal protest, Sarah reported, walking into the laboratory with a datapad in her hands and exhaustion in her eyes. She'd been working 18-hour days for weeks, designing enhancement protocols for species whose biology was completely foreign to her training. They're demanding that the free colonies shut down our operations. Marcus didn't look away from the viewport, where he could see the latest arrival, a transport ship carrying 36 patients from the Outer Rim territories. Let me guess. They're claiming we're conducting illegal medical experiments and violating the Treaty of Biological Ethics. Among other charges, yes, Sarah confirmed. They're also saying that our enhancement procedures pose a threat to the natural order of evolutionary development, Marcus snorted, a sound that had become more frequent as he'd grown accustomed to dealing with galactic bureaucracy. Funny how the natural order only becomes sacred when someone figures out how to improve it. From across the laboratory, Vex looked up from the fabrication unit where he was constructing the latest generation of enhancement nodes. The Council's objections are philosophical rather than practical, he observed. Our success rate with previously incurable conditions now exceeds 97%. The technology works. That's exactly what scares them, said a familiar voice from the laboratory's entrance. Kess walked in with the fluid grace that had become her trademark, no longer the dying child Marcus had first met, but a young adult whose capabilities continued to grow with each passing day. Her white fur now had silver threads running through it, a side effect of her enhanced neural activity that made her look like she was touched by starlight. The medical establishment has built their authority on the idea that some problems can't be solved, she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated she was processing multiple data streams simultaneously. When we demonstrate that those problems are simply engineering challenges that require creative solutions, we undermine their entire power structure. Marcus turned to face her, still amazed by the transformation that had occurred over the past 6 months. Kess wasn't just enhanced, she was evolving, her hybrid nature allowing her to develop capabilities that neither purely biological nor purely technological systems could achieve alone. Speaking of creative solutions, he said, how's the latest batch of patients looking? Kess's golden eyes brightened, and Marcus could see data flowing through her consciousness as she accessed the station's medical systems. 12 cases of neural pathway disorders similar to my original condition. 8 instances of genetic muscle degeneration. 6 cases of sensory processing failures and 5 patients with traumatic spinal injuries that have left them paralyzed. She paused, her enhanced awareness processing information at speeds that still impressed Marcus despite months of familiarity. All of them are excellent candidates for enhancement node integration, she concluded. The procedures should restore full function within 72 hours, with enhancement capabilities developing over the following weeks. Sarah nodded, making notes on her datapad. I'll start preparing the surgical protocols. Vex, how long for the enhancement node fabrication? 48 hours for the complete set, the tech priest replied. The new quantum processing matrices are more complex, but they offer significantly improved integration capabilities. Marcus watched the easy coordination between his team and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with fixing broken machines. This was what they'd built together, not just a medical facility, but a new approach to solving problems that others had given up on. "There's something else," Kess said, her voice taking on a note that Marcus had learned to recognize as significant. "I've been monitoring communications from the core worlds. There are reports of a new syndrome affecting children of multiple species, a condition that causes progressive neural degeneration, similar to what I experienced, but more aggressive." The laboratory fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus had wondered if Kess's condition might be a one-time genetic anomaly, but if it was spreading, how many cases? Sarah asked, her voice tight with professional concern. "Currently confirmed cases number in the thousands," Kess replied. "But the pattern suggests the actual number is much higher. But many cases are being misdiagnosed or attributed to other conditions. The hegemony medical authorities must be aware of this," Vex observed. "Their silence suggests either incompetence or deliberate suppression of information." Marcus felt the familiar anger that came when he encountered willful blindness to problems that needed solving. They can't admit that something like this exists, because that would mean admitting they don't have solutions for it. "While children die," Liara's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. She'd entered the laboratory quietly, but her presence filled the space with barely contained fury. Over the past months, she'd thrown herself into learning everything she could about medical procedures and enhancement technology, driven by the knowledge that her daughter's salvation could be replicated for others. "What do you propose we do?" Sarah asked, though Marcus could see in her expression that she already knew the answer. "We go to them," Kess said simply. "We demonstrate the enhancement technology on a scale that can't be ignored or suppressed. We force them to acknowledge that their incurable conditions are simply problems that require better tools." "That would mean leaving the protection of the free colonies," Vex pointed out. "The moment we enter hegemony space, we become subject to their laws and enforcement capabilities." Marcus walked over to the fabrication unit, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the device that could create miracles from raw materials and quantum theory. 6 months ago, he'd been a simple mechanic working on hover cars and dreaming of stars. Now he was part of something that could change the course of galactic medicine. "My father used to tell me that the best repairs were the ones people said couldn't be done," he said quietly. "Not because they were technically impossible, but because they required more courage than most people had." He looked around at his team, human, alien, and hybrid, united by the shared belief that nothing was truly broken beyond repair. "The Hegemony Council thinks they can suppress what we've learned by keeping us isolated out here on the rim," he continued. "But they're wrong about something fundamental. This isn't just about medical technology. It's about proving that the impossible is just another engineering challenge." Kess stepped forward, her enhanced awareness already reaching out to interface with the station's communication systems. "I can establish secure connections with the underground networks," she said. "Coordinate simultaneous demonstrations across multiple core worlds. By the time the authorities realize what's happening, it will be too late to suppress the information." "A galactic flash mob of medical miracles," Sarah said with a grin that held both excitement and apprehension. "The med schools are going to hate us." "Let them," Marcus replied. "Sometimes you have to break a few paradigms to fix what's really wrong." Over the following days, they worked with focused intensity to prepare what would later be called the Enhancement Liberation. Working through the networks of grateful patients, underground physicians, and free-thinking researchers they'd built over the past months, they coordinated a plan that would demonstrate enhancement technology on dozens of worlds simultaneously. The operations were planned for maximum visibility and minimum interference, public locations, documented procedures, and enough backup systems to ensure that no amount of official pressure could stop them once they'd begun. Kess's unique abilities allowed her to coordinate the entire effort, interfacing with communication systems across the galaxy to ensure perfect timing. Marcus found himself aboard Lyra's ship as they approached the core world of Nexus Prime, watching through the viewports as the planet's orbital defenses tracked their approach. They'd filed legitimate medical research permits through a maze of bureaucratic channels, giving them just enough legal cover to reach the surface before the authorities could intervene. "Incoming transmission from Nexus Control," Liara reported from the pilot station. "They're demanding to know our intentions." "Tell them we're here to fix what's broken," Marcus replied, feeling the familiar thrill of beginning an impossible repair. "And remind them that preventive maintenance is always cheaper than emergency replacement." Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a simple garage to the frontier of galactic medicine, guided by the belief that nothing was truly beyond repair if you had the right tools and enough determination. Below them, Nexus Prime sprawled across continents, home to billions of beings from hundreds of species. Somewhere among them were children suffering from conditions that the medical establishment had declared hopeless, parents who had been told to accept the inevitable, families torn apart by the cruel certainty that some things couldn't be fixed. Marcus Chen had built his career on proving that certainty wrong. Now, with an enhanced alien daughter showing him possibilities he'd never imagined and a team that specialized in impossible solutions, he was about to find out if that philosophy could work on a scale that would change the galaxy forever. The greatest repair of his life was about to begin, and this time, the whole galaxy would be watching. As their ship touched down at the medical center that would serve as their demonstration site, Marcus smiled at the thought of what his father would have said about his quiet mechanic son becoming the catalyst for a revolution in galactic medicine. Some things, he reflected, were worth fixing no matter how impossible they seemed. And sometimes, the most important repairs were the ones that showed others what was possible when you refused to accept that anything was truly broken beyond redemption. The universe was full of broken things waiting for someone stubborn enough to believe they could be fixed. Marcus Chen had found his purpose in being that someone, and with Kess beside him bridging the gap between what was and what could be, after all, the best repairs were always the ones that people said couldn't be done.